again, my fiber friends, and welcome to a special edition of Exploration Crochet, brought to you by the Yarn Over Hook Network. I'm your host, ReRe, and today, on this eve of All Hallows Eve, when some believe the veil between the living and the spirit worlds is thinnest, we're following tales of folklore and fiber, where string can work magic, knots hold power, and every thread creation hums with destiny. For a bit of history, and to set the stage, Samhain, the direct predecessor of Halloween, is a Gaelic festival held on November 1st, marking the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter, or the darker half of the year. It is also the Irish and Scottish Gaelic name for November. Celebrations began on the evening of October 31st, since the Celtic day began and ended at sunset. Samhain, where people would light bonfires, wear costumes to ward off spirits, and tell stories of mischief and magic, has been around for centuries. Crochet, appearing in the 1800s, missed the age of spindle curses and binding knots, and it was too new to have been branded as witchcraft in the age of prosecution. However, because of its association with older needle crafts, it has inherited whispers, the myths, the magic, and the mystery spun by generations of fiber artisans before us. Long before the hook, women and men across cultures believed that thread could do more than create fabric or hold it together. They believed it could stop time, halt disease, loose winds, and hold a person's very fate. So, grab your yarn and hook, maybe light a few candles and settle in. Tonight, we're spinning a little history, a little superstition, and a whole lot of magic, all having to do with thread. So first, let's look at knots. Knots have always been believed to have power, to hold, to hide, to harness. A knot, as seen in many cultures, can symbolize eternity, connectedness, and protection. The endless loops of Celtic knots, for example, can represent the continuous cycle of life, death, and rebirth, the bond between souls, as well as the interconnectedness of all things in the natural world. 3 knots, for Franciscan friars, represent the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. In some Hindu traditions, 3 knots can signify Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, or represent the pledges of a bride and groom, respectively covering thoughts, speech, and actions. The Trinity knot, whose original intention is unknown, has come to symbolize the Holy Trinity of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as well as eternity, strength, and connection. In medieval Europe, people believed that tying a knot or making intricate patterns could bind harmful forces, rendering them powerless. Similarly, a witch's rope or witch's ladder could withhold or release pestilence. The origins of the witch's knot or hexafus are steeped in folklore and tradition. Its primary purpose was to ward off negative energies, evil spirits, and curses. In addition to its protective properties, the witch's knot was often associated with love spells and the binding of agreements or oaths. This dual nature, both defensive and binding, made it a versatile and revered symbol in the practice of folk magic. And these knots are used by Wiccan, or those who practice the craft of the wise, to this very day. On the high seas, there was an old sailor's legend about a witch who sold a sailor a rope with 3 knots. Untying the first, released a gentle breeze to move the sails. The second, released a stronger, faster wind. And the third was said to release a destructive storm or hurricane large enough to destroy a ship. Concern about knots was everywhere. In Shakespeare's Macbeth, he says to the witches, "Though you untie the winds and let them fight." Robert Burns, the Scottish poet, warns his readers to beware of mystic knots. And across the Caribbean and the American South, cords and woven fabric carried their own power in hoodoo and conjure traditions. In her 1935 book, Mules and Men, Zora Neale Hurston describes how root workers tied string 9 times around a charm bag, whispering over each twist, sealing wishes, prayers, or warnings into the cord. Every knot was an act of intention. And of course, knots were significant in other ways. The ancient Inca had the quipu, which was knotted cords that recorded records and the laws of the empire. Alexander the Great and the Gordian knot. He wanted to fulfill the prophecy that whoever could untie it would be destined to rule all of Asia, and his action gave new meaning to the idea of a shortcut. In Jewish folklore, connected to Rachel, the wife of Jacob, a red thread tied around the left wrist wards off the evil eye. In Hindu ritual, the kalawa, another red thread, acts as a shield of protection and reminds the wearer of their faith and religion. And from China comes a romantic red string story, the red string of fate, tied by the moon god Yue Lao, connecting 2 destined souls. And as the proverb says, the thread may stretch or tangle, but it will never break. So from storm knots to love cords, the language of thread speaks across cultures. It binds what we fear and sometimes what we hope for most. In every corner of the world throughout history, peoples have felt empowered by thread. Whether real or imagined, someone somewhere was using thread and working someone's fortune or someone's future. The Greeks had the Moirai, 3 sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of every human life. Clotho spins, Lachesis measures, Atropos cuts. For them, life was reduced to a fragile strand in divine hands. The Norse carried a similar story. At the roots of Yggdrasil, the great world tree, sat the Narns, Urthur, Verthindi, and Skuld, shaping the destinies of humans, dwarves, and gods alike. The Narns visited each newly born child to allot his or her future. To some, their weaving was time itself. In ancient Egypt, the goddess Neith, conflated by the Greeks with their goddess Athena, a deity of war and weaving, was believed to have woven the very fabric of the world. And then there is spinning, which carried its own aura of danger. Historically, spinning at certain times was considered bad luck, sometimes leading to curses on the spinner's health or the yarn's quality. In Romania, spinning on Tuesdays was strictly forbidden, as it was considered the day of the demonic entity Mart Solea, who lives up in the mountains and descends on Tuesday nights to lure with its singing and punish women caught working. In Germany, it was believed spinning on Good Friday could cause your fingers to become inflamed, and spinning left undone by Saturday evening could cause the yarn to tangle or ruin all remaining flax, making it impossible to spin or bleach. And then there is the long list of legends and fairy tales involving threads, knots, and fabric. Loki, who is attributed with having used string to invent fishing nets, only later to become entangled himself. And we know Maui, he and his brothers tied ropes into a noose to snare the sun. You're welcome. Ariadne and her ball of yarn, which guided Theseus back out of the labyrinth after he killed the Minotaur. And of course, Arachne from Metamorphosis, who picked the wrong fight with Minerva, the goddess of both strategic warfare and weaving. Speaking of spiders, there's the spider grandmother of Navajo and Hopi tradition, the deity who taught the people weaving and other arts. And of course, Sleeping Beauty, the cursed spindle, and the eternal sleep. Behind that fairy tale lies the older superstition that spinning tools left whirling overnight might draw spirits to help finish the work. Helpful if they're kind, unsettling if they're not. The Three Aunts, the story of the girl who has helped to spin flax to yarn, weave that yarn to cloth, and then sew that cloth to shirts. The Crane Wife, spinning cloth from her own feathers, showing that creativity can cost us pieces of ourselves. The Three Spinning Women, involving a girl who must learn to spin herself or lose her children. We can't forget Rumpelstiltskin, the imp who spun gold in exchange for a woman's firstborn child. Man, there's a lot of forfeiting of children in these things. The girl in the Norwegian tale, East of the Sun, West of the Moon, uses a golden carding comb and a golden spinning wheel to win her beloved's freedom, although she doesn't actually use either. But speaking of bear curses, in Disney's Brave, Queen Eleanor and her daughter Merida are bound together, as Merida herself says. Fate is woven together like a cloth, so that one's destiny intertwines with many others. In the movie, a tapestry of the family woven by Eleanor is severed by Merida, where she and her mother stand together. When Merida mends it with stitches, she also mends the family. And one of my favorites from Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey, which is coming to theaters in 2026. I don't know, it better be good, otherwise, my feelings are going to be hurt. Penelope. She wove a special kind of magic, weaving by day, unweaving by night, keeping her freedom and power through patience and cunning. Her loom was both shield and spell, because she didn't want to marry. She was awaiting the return of her man. All of these stories and myths remind us of the power of thread and the ties that bind. So, was crochet ever directly associated with divination or enchantments? No, not really. But it carries the ghosts of those older beliefs, of threads that shape fate, and knots that hold peace or pestilence, and strings that tie souls together. Maybe that's why crochet feels magical, especially when you consider that every project has its own spell, conjuring beauty and connection, all from a single thread. As Merida said at the end of Brave, there are those who say fate is something beyond our command, that destiny is not our own. But I know better. Our fate lives within us. You only have to be brave enough to see it. She reminds us that destiny isn't some fixed thing written in stone or controlled by someone pulling the threads. It lives within us. And crochet shows us how that's possible. Yarn by itself is just potential, and a pattern just a suggestion. But in our hands, loop by loop, it becomes something with shape and structure and substance. That's how life works. We don't get handed a finished pattern, we make it up as we go. The people we touch, the lessons we learn, the memories we tie into every project. It's all part of a living fabric, one we crochet with the world. And like Merida, if we tear the cloth, we can still mend it. That's the magic. We just have to be brave enough to see it. I know I've mentioned a lot of fairy tales and myths and legends in this episode. As a kid, these made up my favorite reading. So I put together a reading list for anyone who would like to examine any of these stories more closely. I'll leave the link in the description. This has been Exploration Crochet. Thanks for listening.